We are back to finish off this iceberg in part 2. Let's not waste a second, pick up right where we left off. Darkening. Canseco's double. Jose Canseco is a former Oakland A's star who was a monster hitter for part of his career. That monster hitting may have been in part to some steroid usage that he admitted to doing, but that hasn't stopped him from having a flamboyant public image, we'll say. Now, a little lesser known fact about Jose Canseco is that he has an identical twin who was also a ball player himself. And these guys are like identical. It's tough to tell them apart. His brother's even snuck into big-time celebrity events posing as Jose before. But this twin brother, who was named Ozzy, was a minor league ball player, and he dipped his head in the majors a couple times. One of those times was on the Oakland A's, alongside his brother. And that is precisely where this conspiracy, that shockingly I know was first introduced by a Redditor, was brought up. It's proposed that during this short stint on the Oakland A's with both the twins, Jose Canseco was listed as both himself and his brother, in order to get the A's star more at-bats by pretending to have him play two positions. Now, of course, the positions couldn't be on the field at the same time, but they would stick Jose at the beginning of the lineup and say right field, and then put Ozzy towards the end of the lineup at DH, allowing Jose to hit twice with no risk of overlapping. This theory is kind of a juiced up Morris Brothers theory from the NBA, and it gives off very strong bro vibes. Like, if I'm going to be an MLB superstar, my brother is too, even if I have to literally do it for him. I love it. It reminds me of how Tom Hanks, who voices Woody in Toy Story, he does the movies, but his brother voices Woody for the games and action figures and branding, all that stuff. Brotherly love. But of the 9 games these guys played together, 8 of them saw only one twin in the field at once, which makes it seem a little, like they could have done it. It's weird that every game they played, they weren't on the field together almost. I'll link this post in the description, and you can see pitch by pitch how each of Ozzy's at-bats went, and decide for yourself if they were actually Jose batting. Donaghy goes deeper. Now, the Tim Donaghy scandal is well known, and not a conspiracy, so let's recap what happened there first. In 2007, NBA referee Tim Donaghy was sentenced to 15 months in prison for wire fraud and transmitting betting information after he was caught taking money from gamblers on NBA games that he was refereeing. He worked with a ring of gamblers to provide inside information and possibly bias towards the game that he was so close to. So that's about what we know. Donaghy was the only referee indicted for this. Donaghy did of course cooperate, getting the head gambler and middleman both arrested in the process and getting his sentence drastically reduced.
When they say cooperate, they mean he snitched.
But everything after that, the actual jail time served, it's all a conspiracy, and there is a lot of it. One widely conjured up is that the belief that Donaghy was not acting alone, but was instead just the only one who got caught. Plenty of other names of referees have been thrown into the hat of people who could have possibly been in on the rigging. Guys like Dick Bavetta, Mark Davis, and Scott Foster. Foster's probably involved in these the most, and I've seen the idea floating around that Tim Donaghy worked with Scott Foster but didn't rat him out because Donaghy actually made way more money than he was caught making, and Foster knows that. So the theory goes they're just kind of mutually not telling on each other. Another one surrounding Donaghy is actually that he was kind of used as a scapegoat for the NBA in a gambling conspiracy that went way higher up in the ranks, all the way to, of course, David Stern. I feel like every good NBA conspiracy leads back to David Stern, one way or another. He is the tip of the pyramid. Marino's slide. Dan Marino paved a career as one of the greatest athletes of all time to never win a championship, pioneering quick pass offenses in the NFL. But the day he was selected in 1983, success was the furthest thing from his mind. Looked at as one of many top quarterbacks in this loaded draft, Dan Marino was a victim to a steep draft fall. Teams just weren't picking him, and he slid all the way down to pick 27, going after all the other QBs like John Elway, Jim Kelly, and Tony Eason. Marino fell so far in the draft, and it was such a surprise that he hadn't even met Don Shula yet, the legendary coach of the Miami Dolphins who ended up drafting him. But this conspiracy theory suggests there's more reasons than just heavy QB talent that caused Dan to fall in the draft. You see, a rumor was started that somehow caught fire during the draft that Dan had some deep ties with drugs. Most media outlets will kind of dance around the fact, but I'll just give it to you. They said Dan Marino was a cokehead. Dan's issues were a kind of a known factor long before the draft. While he was in college, he was known for, we'll say, partying hard, but he's a star kid in college. That's not crazy unheard of. This type of slide, it is pretty crazy though, so there's got to be something further at play. The Pittsburgh Steelers coach at the time, Chuck Noll, actually admitted 9 years later that this rumor was the reason the Steelers passed on Marino in the draft, and that was the team closest to him in college. Pretty wild. A lot of people also actually speculate this rumor to have been started by someone within the Dolphins organization so that Marino would hopefully fall to them. I feel like the fact that Don Shula never met him sort of disproves this theory, but it could be, and if it is, that is insane planning and stellar balls on the Dolphins' end to go this strong through with a guy that your coach hasn't even met. But even if the rumor wasn't started by the Dolphins, I think they still would have taken him. You're selecting 22-year-olds to come live in Miami with millions of dollars. Most of them are going to be on coke anyways. What happens in Vegas? The UNLV basketball team, or University of Nevada, Las Vegas, hasn't been so hot in recent years, but back in the early 90s, they were an absolute force. The team won the 1990 NCAA basketball championship, clobbering Duke, a national powerhouse, by 30 points in front of America. This still is the highest scoring championship game in tournament history, and for UNLV to do this, it was a statement. UNLV was here to play. The next year, they followed this championship up somehow even better. UNLV walked to a 27-0 regular season record, going undefeated with 5 wins against ranked teams. They waltzed their way through the Big West Championship and the NCAA tournament too. This UNLV team was literally unstoppable right now, winning round after round of March Madness until, once again, they found themselves in the Final Four. And their opponent in the semifinal, a familiar one. It was Duke once again. The same team they had just laughed off the court in last year's championship game. What could be better for UNLV? Well, you do remember where UNLV is, right? That's what you get for waking up in Vegas. That's what you get. Now, as dominant as this team was, and as much as it seemed like they were set up for championship success, they lost to Duke in that Final Four game. A heartbreaker. They lost by just 2 points. The team was broken. Or were they? Naturally, with them being in Vegas and all, a lot of gambling theories kind of run rampant, and there's a lot of people who think that the UNLV men's team threw this basketball game in connection to a gambling ring. And it's more than just the fact that they're in Las Vegas that this theory stands on. Infamously, 3 UNLV basketball players were photographed in a hot tub with Richard the Fixer Perry, a man notoriously known for rigging sports games. Pretty shady stuff. But I'm sorry. Imagine your nickname being the Fixer. That guy's got a family. He's got to go through life by that, right? Arenas arson. Gilbert Arenas doesn't necessarily have the sweetest reputation, but this theory's absolutely bonkers, and I don't know how or why it hasn't been discussed more. It's seriously jaw-dropping to me. Now, this isn't about Arenas bringing a gun to practice, and even though it says arson, it's not even about him threatening to burn down his teammate Javaris Crittenton's house. Those are both true. They definitely happened. But this one refers to a possible house burn-in that could have occurred, maybe, involving Gilbert Arenas. Now, there's limited evidence for this, to say the least, but the evidence we do have is just insane. This interview was with Nick Young and Richard Jefferson and some other guys, and Gilbert Arenas himself. In this interview, the topic of Arenas burning down someone's house is brought up, and not only is the subject changed pretty quickly and awkwardly, but Arenas is noticeably very uncomfortable with it and tries to move on, even getting called out for it.
And Jalen Rose.
Yeah, we beat him in the playoffs.
They had a nice 4 guards.
I like Jamal.
Yeah.
Gil, did you have friends in the league?
What?
Like, did people like you? Like,
Everyone loved me.
They did.
That was the nicest.
Man.
People were scared of you.
No.
Tell him. Tell him.
Yeah,
Tell him how
they
you
were
burned
just
somebody's house down.
See,
You burned somebody's house. Tell him because he called you a loser. He called
tell
people
us the story.
Tell us the story. I already know this. I already know the story. Don't you tap my feet.
What are you talking about?
He said, don't you tap my feet. He's like, yo, man, it's still a criminal trial. Man. Come on now.
I mean, him kicking Nick Young, it's not even trying to hide it. It's like a sitcom.
Don't you tap my feet.
And Gilbert wasn't oblivious to this. On the edited release of this interview, this entire part, this exchange, is just edited out. It's not there. So Arenas went out of his way to hide this. You can only find this certain clip from watching the full, hour and a half long, unedited version of the interview on YouTube, which that's quite the digging from NBA fans to find. But it does prove that Gilbert went out of his way to hide this theory, which... The rugby poisoning. We get to explore the wonderfully hardcore sport of rugby for the next entry, but as it states, this conspiracy doesn't involve much on the field. Now, in the 1995 Rugby World Cup final, which was in South America, a team called the Springboks were taking on a team called... Can I say that? Is that really... The All Blacks? Well, the All Blacks team, as in the team name, lost this championship game, in a bit of an upset for the squad. But almost the entire team was not at 100% for this championship, as what was said to be about 2/3 of the team fell ravagingly ill right before the game. By the All Blacks coach, this was not seen as a coincidence. Rather, he believed his team was poisoned by something served to them by tournament staff. A former South American police chief shared this belief, specifically theorizing that the water was poisoned, as people who ate all sorts of different stuff got sick, but everyone drank water. What everyone remembers strongly in their heads, though, is some of the strongest and toughest guys, these rugby players, just on the floor, lying ill, bedridden. Now, they still only lost by 3 points despite being poisoned. They were, biologically warfared upon, but a private investigator dug into this situation and he couldn't turn up anything. Fixed Super Bowl. Super Bowl III is famously known for being the New York Jets' only Super Bowl win, which Joe Namath correctly called was coming before the game happened. But that well-known prediction is just a tiny bit of multiple pieces of evidence that the game may have been rigged. It was 1969. Every 60s dude, bro, is probably making awesome jokes about the year, living it up. What a time to be alive. It was also the first time the Super Bowl was actually called the Super Bowl. 1 and 2 were just kind of named after. Now, football fans at this time had a fear in the combination of the AFL and NFL because, well, the NFL was just kind of better. A lot of people thought combining the league was taking the overall talent down and that an AFL team would just not really consistently be able to beat an NFL team ever. Enter the AFL's own Joe Namath-led Jets. The perfect storm for an AFL team to finally come in and crown themselves champion over all the NFL teams. That's just what happened, becoming the first AFL team to win the Super Bowl and reinstalling faith in football fans that this league could work. So the motive is right there, it's pretty obvious. They had a good reason for the Jets to win this game, but is there anything else? Well, the Colts went in heavy favorites, with many people saying the Jets had no shot at winning, including this Vince Lombardi guy who seems to know what he's talking about sometimes. But of course the Jets won, holding to Joe Namath's crazy-looking promise and somehow making it come true. Decades after the game, Colts Pro Bowl defensive lineman Bubba Smith accused his own quarterback that game, Earl Morrall, for throwing it, as old Earl tossed for 71 yards and 3 interceptions that fateful day. I didn't leave touchdowns out either. There were none. The depths. Super Bowl's lost media. Now, this entry is kind of almost a full, complete story. It's not quite done. There's still a little unsolved, so it's still here, but we almost have a nice, wholesome story for us. Lost media is an extremely interesting subject to me, exploring forms of media that have gone over the years completely unavailable to the public and thus known as lost. There's lost media in everything. Video games, TV shows, news stories, and of course sports. Sports are constantly being played and recorded in countless parts of the world. The thought of just how much lost sports media there could be out there, it's infinite. You could never stop finding new stuff. But how could tape of one of the biggest sporting events in the world go lost? Happening over 50 years ago, the first Super Bowls have not been easy to keep full records of. They've always had Super Bowl 1, it's the first one, but that leaves Super Bowl II as the forgotten child that was almost completely lost to time. You see, it was actually believed that Super Bowl II was lost for a while. Even in 1968, when the game aired live, the last few minutes of the second quarter and the first few minutes of halftime didn't air nationally. They only aired locally on the WJW stations and to a couple northeastern cities. So if you saw the full game live all the way through, you were already in a pretty rare club, but decades later it was thought impossible to do that anymore. That is, until a conspiracy started floating around that the NFL had full-length footage of the game, including the coveted end of the second quarter, but they just weren't releasing it. Then, out of nowhere, this mysterious man, a YouTube account by the name Lambo Packerbacker, just dropped the entire radio broadcast of the game with brand new videos and pictures throughout Super Bowl II. No one knows who this guy was or how he got any of the footage that he posted, but as soon as it got popular, the NFL took it down for copyright. So now finally, with all the pressure on them, the word was kinda out, the NFL released the entire game themselves, which they did have vaulted, and it is public now. You can find it on YouTube, including the end of the first half. But my question is, who is Lambo Packerbacker, and how did he get his hands on Super Bowl II? Phelps lost. In the 2008 Olympics, Michael Phelps was in absolute peak form, laughing other countries' best athletes out of the pool event after event. This man had the Midas touch in Beijing, so much so that he set an Olympic record with 8 gold medals, the most ever won in a single Olympics. However, one race that Phelps won this year has been brought into question by a man you could say is pretty credible to talk about the sport. Mark Spitz is a slightly older Olympic swimmer than Phelps, but he had a legendary career in his own right. He popularized a theory also that discredits Michael Phelps' 100-meter fly gold medal and has a domino of effects from it. You see, Phelps won this race just barely edging out the Serbian silver place finisher. Official time cards put Phelps 100th of a second ahead of Cavic. However, this race has had controversy ever since the moment it ended, before Spitz even spoke about it, really. He just popularized it. A lot of people think, Spitz included, that Phelps' hand actually didn't touch the wall first, as it was called, but instead it just somehow registered to the timer first. Mark Spitz even claims that he somehow acquired a written letter from Omega, the timer company for this race, that admitted they got it wrong and Phelps didn't win. Now, let me get you with a kicker. If we play with this theory and say it's true, what does it really mean? Well, it actually has quite the impact, as Phelps only wins 7 gold medals in 2008, meaning he doesn't break the record. He only ties the record for most golds. Ties with one man. Ties with Mark Spitz. Mark, you dirty little rot. Redskins get worse. Now, the Washington Commanders were just recently finally sold away from Dan Snyder and his obviously terrible ownership. But, well, this theory says you may have been conditioned by everything around you to believe that. Now, Snyder is a bad owner. There's not really any doubting that. He's a bad person. But a lot of people think that he's kind of just as bad as most of the owners in the NFL. There's no shortage of terrible things done by many franchise owners. You can dig into all their histories if you want. Just make sure you don't look up what Jerry Jones was doing in this picture. And so this theory actually connects back to Jeff Bezos. Rich Amazon guy, you know? Stay with me. Jeff Bezos is the heart of this theory. What he wants goes, and what he wants you to believe, you will eventually end up believing, one way or another.
How does he get Dan Snyder fired?
Well, in 2019, the controversy over the Washington Redskins name was sort of reignited after a Washington Post article. This was sort of the jumpstart to the public turning hard on Dan Snyder, digging into the rest of his horrible things. And well, who owns the company that published that article? The Washington Post. Jeff Bezos. Then, after Snyder pushed out, Jeff tried to buy the team. You have no free will. You think what Jeff wants you to think. Mark Reynolds is blind. Mark Reynolds was an MLB infielder who could hit some bombs at the prime of his career. But despite being paid millions of dollars to do things like hit a ball and catch a ball, some people think that Mark Reynolds is blind, or at least extremely visually impaired. Evidence time. Watch this infield pop up. Reynolds is at first and seems to get lost within the field almost. He's clearly disoriented and is hypothesized to have gotten distracted from loud screaming fans for a second, and once they quieted down, he found his footing. Take a look at this one. Another infield pop-up, and Mark Reynolds calls that he has it. But his teammates know he's blind, and this is all charade. The second baseman calls him off and catches it. Look at how far off Mark Reynolds was when he called for this ball versus where it was actually caught. Okay, this GIF is pretty wild. It shows how long it takes Mark to even flinch when being picked off, even though he was looking right at the pitcher. Mark really might have played in the MLB blind. Look at this one. Mark's chasing a foul ball. He knows he's not catching anything. He just has to make it look real. The ball lands behind where he ran. He just looks discombobulated. What are you doing, Mark? Okay, one more, because this is blowing my mind now. Look, Mark gets hit by a pitch on his foot. Now, you gotta imagine a normal person is kind of seeing that the ball hit them, realizing it happened, and flinching. But Mark doesn't move until the second it takes for his brain to actually realize he's in pain. He didn't even know he got hit. How is this possible? I went into this theory thinking it was so stupid, and I'm a believer. Immaculate Reception. You've likely heard of the Immaculate Reception. A different tale than the storybook one we've heard before. Now, this famous play versus the Raiders is known for being barely seen. That's part of its fame. It was just so damn unexpected. The television crew was about half awake after the ball was initially tipped, and who knows which referees were still paying attention. So, what happens next is where our theory lies. Franco Harris made LeBron's dad. The fact that arguably the greatest basketball player to ever live and walk the earth might not even know who his real dad is has always been such a despairing fact to me. Of course, LeBron might have the answer 100% to himself and chooses to keep it private, which would be understandable. But to the broader NBA world, there's a lot of mystery on this topic. The sort of accepted answer is Anthony McClelland, who is not a superhero or a demigod, which already makes me doubt it's him. But he wasn't really around much for LeBron's childhood. LeBron didn't really grow up with a dad, which is where the base of this theory's from. With the opportunity for unknown, countless different names have been thrown into the ringer for LeBron's dad. There's people who look like him, Roland Bivens, people who play like him, Earl Lloyd, and, well, the most likely contenders, Delonte West. Just him. It's probably Delonte. Yes, Delonte West is only a year older than LeBron, but it was a different time back then. You can't compare it. The Abyss. Ersan Ilyasova. Ersan Ilyasova is a guy who you might remember if you're a big NBA fan, probably if anything for his long tenure on the Bucks before he became a bit of a journeyman. He had a pretty non-crazy career in retrospect. Normal wouldn't be a bad word to describe his playing days. However, as has been reported by numerous sources at this point, there's a wild theory that Ersan Ilyasova is, well, not Ersan Ilyasova. He's instead a completely different person, really named Arsen Ilyasova. It doesn't seem like a big difference, but it is. Ilyasova's birthday that he gave to officials is allegedly false, claiming him to be 3 years younger than he really is. This discrepancy happened around the time his family crossed the border into the US, and it would have allowed for him to come in as a minor and also just be that much more promising of a basketball prospect, that much younger. Poor Scherger, man. It was 1963. The highly esteemed Scherger existed as an Irish sporting legend, one of the best athletes to ever represent Ireland. But on this day, Scherger was kidnapped and held at ransom for £2 million. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Scherger was a horse. Now, this poor four-legged comrade was swooped up by, well, we don't know who. Still, and that's the conspiracy right there. It's a good old-fashioned whodunit. Scherger was never, ever found again. They found that the horse was probably shot about 4 days after the kidnapping, although I'm not sure how they did that without the body. Theories range from the Irish police being in on the kidnapping to random gangs to corrupt Irish businessmen. The leading idea is members from a group called the IRA, or the Irish Republican Army. The cause for the great horse snapping is just as much a mystery. I've seen it all boiled down to money, and I've seen it traced back to Muslims too, so I don't know. And poor Scherger, well, he did nothing to deserve any of this. He has no concept of money, no ideals of financial literacy. Horses don't have money. Belichick's secret weapon. Arguably the craziest and coolest conspiracy on this list to me. This is Bill Belichick. You probably know him. But this is Ernie Adams, or just Ernie. You probably don't know him. But these guys, ever since they met as childhood friends, have come as a tandem duo. And Ernie here just may be a big secret to Bill Belichick's success. You see, Ernie's been described by those who met him as words like a genius, a football savant, and akin to James Bond's character Q. He's a football mind of football minds. His medulla oblongata is probably an egg-shaped ball itself. On game day, he is the guy in the booth talking directly to Bill Belichick on the sideline. I've also seen a lot of reports saying that Ernie is on the autism spectrum, although I can't verify that. I don't want to just go around saying that, but if it is true, it's likely helped Ernie key in on football completely and put ultra focus into it. But a lot of people think that Ernie deserves way more credit than he gets, maybe even a slice of Bill Belichick's pie for what he's contributed to the Patriots' success. This theory even extends to the well-known Spygate theory. A lot of Patriots fans will argue that there wasn't really much use for the clips that they attained in Spygate, but, well, Ernie had use for them. Ernie could sit and watch those clips over and over, digesting them and noticing any little tendencies or possibilities for advantage. So, according to this theory, even Spygate was done for the sake of Ernie Adams. To finish off Ernie, just take a look at some stuff that a few Patriots players have said about him. When asked, who is Ernie Adams? Linebacker Adelius Thomas said, I don't know what his job title is. I didn't even know his last name was Adams. Offensive tackle Matt Light. Well, Ernie's a bit of a mystery to all of us. I'm not sure what Ernie does, but I'm sure whatever it is, he's good at it. And then Wes Welker with the same question. Who? You know, that guy that's always with Bill Belichick that doesn't get talked about much? Oh, Ernie, yeah. He's gotta be a genius. 9/11 and the Patriots. This is a crazy dark theory that permeates in the season directly after the 2001 World Trade Center attacks. This insane string of thought says that, simply put, in order to boost patriotism the year after the attacks in the country, the NFL purposely had the Patriots take home the Super Bowl, because who better? There's not really much to say about this one, although it does tie in with a greater NFL conspiracy of the Tuck Rule. And, you know, if you want to believe this one, well, this explains the Tuck Rule a little more. There's your motive right there from the NFL. Babe Ruth, murderer. Babe Ruth, obviously a baseball legend, old as heck, but, well, the theory speaks for itself. According to some, Babe Ruth's ex-wife, Helen, was his victim. And there's a whole story behind it. See, Helen did tragically die in a house fire that to this day remains unsolved. Theories for the house fire are everything from a lit cigarette to an overload of electric waves, but the darkest one is undoubtedly about the candy bar man himself. Helen's sister blamed Babe Ruth as Helen had refused to officially divorce Babe despite separation unless Babe paid her a huge sum of money. Helen's sister believes the house fire was Babe's way of taking that problem into his own hands. This is obviously a tough one to wrap your mind around, but it's horrifying to think about even on the tiny, minuscule chance that it could be true. As could any theory on this entire iceberg. Or they could not be. Who knows, maybe I went 0 for 37. Not a single one of these is true. Doesn't matter, you already watched the video. That's right, we finally reached the end and we can give the great who knows to this whole video. We've now got over an hour of Iceberg conspiracy content though for you to sift through at your own needs however you want. It doesn't cost money, you do it whenever, it's free. Why use Netflix over this? I already have some sweet stuff in the vault that I'm already ready for, just waiting to unleash on you guys, so stay tuned, only good things coming. For now, I appreciate your company. I get lonely in here. Please come join me on another video. Bye bye.